Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we watch something and introduce it to all of you, usually a television show, usually week to week, sometimes movies, or sometimes binges, and hopefully provide some context and camaraderie along the way. Not much camaraderie here today. I will be doing this episode solo. Haven't done a solo episode in quite some time. Well, not a fully solo one. I'll be breaking down the 6 new episodes of The Black Mirror, the Netflix anthology dystopian sci-fi series from Charlie Brooker, and also briefly giving you my impressions of the premiere episode of The Last of Us, the massively popular HBO adaptation of the very popular video game. Also here on the pod, we are continuing to cover Mobland week to week, and Darren and I will be breaking down that 3rd episode, which is already available, by the way, and that episode should be publishing probably Wednesday night. And in that same episode, I believe we will also be discussing the Black Mirror episodes that Darren did get around to watching. And also, Sona and I just started discussing the new John Hamm series on Apple TV+, Your Friends and Neighbors, which just premiered on Friday, and from our download seems to be a very popular show. Or perhaps just dovetails so well with our coverage of the White Lotus that most of the audience migrated from one show to the other. There is currently a very cheap coupon, I believe it's $2 or $3 a month, for Apple TV Plus in tandem with the premiere of this new series. So anybody can watch the first episode, maybe the first 2 episodes of Your Friends and Neighbors for free through the Apple TV Plus app on your phone or just on your smart TV. Just install it. I believe if you do install it for the very first time, you get 3 months for free. If you have had Apple TV Plus in the past, you can resubscribe with the coupon link that I'll include in the show notes, if you'd like to watch along with us. Apple TV Plus also currently has The Studio, which is doing very well by their standards, a very funny Seth Rogen insider parody of Hollywood, and of course just recently wrapped up their biggest show ever, Severance, something else you might want to binge if you haven't caught up on it. Subscribe to us on YouTube. There are some video episodes there, recaps of the finale of Severance and The White Lotus. Reach out to us, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. Subscribe so you know when new episodes become available. Give us a positive review if you'd like to support the podcast on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. And of course, recommend us to your friends, families, neighbors. If they happen to be watching any of this, recommend our podcast as a companion to them. It's how we grow the podcast. Before I get into the Black Mirror breakdown, I did want to spend a few minutes talking about the premiere episode of The Last of Us Season 2. Do check the show notes, by the way, if you want to jump directly to the Black Mirror reviews and recaps. I've been very torn on whether I plan to do a recap week to week of this season, of this series. We did recap Season 1. I wasn't a huge fan of Season 1. I'll give you my thoughts on that in just a moment. But I might spend a few minutes week to week going through the show. It's only 7 episodes long, so it's a pretty short time commitment. And of course, it is phenomenally successful. Of course, the first game itself, the first season of the series based on the first game itself, very much one-to-one, with the addition of these side or expansions of these side characters' backstories. But the main storyline very much follows what happens in the first game. The announcement was made pretty early on that Season 2 is going to be different than the second game, although pulling in episodes or elements from that second game. I won't spoil the second game for you, and I haven't played it, but there are probably things that happen there that would not work for a season a series, I should say, that they probably expect to extend for at least one more season, if not multiple more seasons. As a matter of fact, definitely one more season. We're getting a short 7 episodes, as I mentioned, Season 2. There is a much longer, I think 13 episode Season 3 currently being planned or maybe even beginning production now. And I think the anticipation is that that would not be the final season of the show. So obviously they need to go off book at this point. Although the creator of the game itself is one of the creative teams, one of the writers here. Before I get to the negative commentary I have on Season 1, I do want to shout out a few things. This is beautifully, handsomely produced. I love these creators who also did Chernobyl, which is one of the most amazing TV productions of the past decade or so. And they bring the same high quality production values to Season 1 of the show. HBO spent a lot of money on it. And there are two practically bottle episodes you can watch. The third episode, Long, Long Time. This is the episode where there's a romance between Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett, Bill and Frank, in this flashback to the height of the outbreak of these fungal zombies. And an episode called Left Behind, where we see where Ellie first discovered that she has this immunity to this fungal infection. So my general issues I have with season 1 of the show, and I'm going to spoil season 1 of the show, by the way, so step away if you need to. First of all, I felt that as beautifully produced as this was, I have seen multiple seasons of The Walking Dead, and it's not only that zombies, of course, these are a different type of zombies, but zombies roaming through the woods and this very Western feeling, often on horseback, this Western style imagery of people crossing some wasteland had been done over and over again. And of course, this isn't the first time that this imagery will reoccur. We just saw Fallout as well. Many popular shows that play with this zombie trope. It is shocking to me, actually, how unbelievably popular this motif is in the genre in general. But I don't know if I was getting anything additionally out of this version of the story that I haven't already seen in so many of these other iterations of a similar story, other than the quality of the production, which is granted impeccable. So I was in and out of the show from week to week. The Melanie Linsky episode, just for its immensity of its action, was very well done, and that was thrilling to watch. But there are multiple episodes where you get attached to somebody and then they get infected and you have to leave them behind. And there are other episodes where they meet some survivors and they seem to be really kindly, but actually they're cannibals or whatever it happens to be. I mean, this is just pro forma at this point, honestly. So those were the things that I found negatives in the show. And all of this culminated for me in the finale, where I felt that we either take this show as this very naturalistic and realistic exploration of these ideas, or you can have a much more action-oriented version of this show. Of course, we're going for the more grounded, naturalistic view. And I'm not going to relitigate the finale of this show, but it is shocking to me that some of the decisions that were made there, it just seems that for things to play out the way they did, not only is this arguably a very cynical view of how things would play out, it also requires these fireflies to be really bad at what they do, to like not even be able to secure a floor or the building or keep one person by the car, the only car that's operational where you know everybody's headed. I mean, like I said, I don't want to relitigate that, but I was like, man, I either take this seriously or not, and I don't buy the way this plays out. Maybe it plays out exactly the same way in the game, but that doesn't mean you need to imitate it. You could change some details to make it seem a little more believable. And we leave things on this very ambiguous note. Once again, spoilers for the end of that show. Did he make the right choice or not? Was he being selfish? Almost certainly, I think the show is trying to tell us that Joel's decisions there were selfish. So it wasn't the ambiguity or even maybe the negative take I had on what the decisions he made were, and how maybe we all make very selfish decisions that aren't for the greater good. In the end, we think we're being good people, but we're not. I think the show wants us to ask those questions. Like I said, it's just the fact that when I'm rolling my eyes at all the action in the finale, it makes it hard for me to engage with the deeper themes. That all leads to this premiere episode of season 2. And to the show's credit, it of course addresses this. We had that really excellent final moment in season 1 where Ellie at some point understands what actually happened, the decision that Joel made. She knows that he's lying to her, but chooses to believe it. It's the convenient truth, but oftentimes we have to believe convenient truths. But apparently, it's not only that she's become a more and more rebellious teenager, there is an alienation, and maybe it's coming from Joel as well, and maybe the awkwardness around the events of season 1 is what's leading to this alienation between this father-daughter relationship that has formed between them. Very importantly, of course, this episode opens with the Caitlin Dever character and the surviving Fireflies, who seem to be mostly of a younger generation, are burying their dead. And this is a 5-year gap, by the way, between season 1 and season 2. In this 5-year period, they just knew Joel, Joe, they didn't know much. They knew this supposed mythology that there is a girl who is immune to the bite of these zombies, although they don't really seem to believe it. But she's on a mission to locate Joel and not only find him, but kill him. And not only kill him, but torture him. We don't see them until the very end of the episode. Apparently, 5 years later, have identified who Joel is, where he's staying, or at least they suspect it's him, and theoretically they're going to try to infiltrate Jackson Hole. Over the course of the episode, we discover that more and more people are showing up. Joel is reluctant to let these people in. His sister-in-law wants him to be a little more empathetic towards the plight of these new arrivals. But he makes a valid point that all of these new arrivals, of course, need resources and can cause complexity in governing all of these people. So these new arrivals are potentially causing some kind of stress. There is this rift between Ellie and Joel. The Fireflies are approaching. And as if that's not enough, we also discover that there are a new kind of zombie, the stalking zombies, who seem to be able to work collectively to take down much bigger game, to the point where Ellie, being very cavalier on one of these scouting missions, ends up getting bit by one of these stealth zombies. But apparently, we already know she's immune, so other than having some more new weird scars on her body, she's probably okay. Of course, they're still keeping it a secret that she has this immunity. And Ellie is striking up a romance with her best friend Dina, who is not immune to zombie bites and should be much less cavalier. I did find this, the fact that they basically are putting their lives on the line when they don't need to be, is infuriating to me, as teenagers often are. But it did seem believable. I wouldn't be surprised if everybody here has a death wish, given the fact they've probably, even when things seem to be going all right, it seems that they lose members of the community pretty regularly. To that point, we see that Joel is actually in counseling with Gail, played by Catherine O'Hara. We just saw Catherine O'Hara in the studio. Here she is again. And we don't even know the details of this yet, but apparently Joel killed Gail's husband. Pretty awkward when you've killed your counselor's husband. She says, "I know why you did it, but I still hate you for doing it." So it's not like it was a cold-blooded murder. Maybe he was bitten by one of the zombies. Anyway, all that is to say that people die here pretty regularly. So maybe treat your life with a little more care. Oh, and of course, we also see that this reddish fungus that seems to be activating these smarter versions of the zombies seem to be infiltrating via this pipe, seem to be infiltrating Jackson Hole. And if you watch the scenes from the season, very brief scenes, there seems to be something happening within Jackson Hole itself, whether it's humans that are invading or perhaps people getting infected by this new spore. Things are probably not going to be peaceful in Jackson Hole for that long. So anyway, 7 episodes. I can commit 6 more episodes beyond this one. Sure, why not? And if the trailer indicates anything at all, this looks pretty action-packed. Not this week's episode, pretty quiet, maybe just the calm before the storm. But it looks like we'll be moving from locations and things will be getting hectic pretty quickly. So that's my short review. I am probably committed to the rest of this season, despite all of my existing concerns after season 1. Okay, so Black Mirror. First of all, if you'd like to know a lot more about Black Mirror, I have 2 popular episodes in our back catalog. One discussing the most recent season of Black Mirror, previous to this one, from about 1.5 years ago, nearly 2 years at this point. A season that I thought was mostly successful, especially considering the absolute disaster that I thought the previous season had been. And I had also already not been a huge fan of Bandersnatch either. And that also leads me to the second episode we published, or I published around that time, where I ranked all of the Black Mirror episodes up until that 6th season. And I've also been rewatching the earlier seasons of Black Mirror in preparation for this very episode. So once again, I won't go into the full breakdown of the whole entire series up until this point. Do check out those previous episodes if you're curious to hear my thoughts. But I will briefly talk about my rewatch, where I had seen the first season of the series again, an incredibly bleak but amazingly prescient investigation of our relationship with technology as technology became more and more central to our social lives. Honestly, always with the most cynical perspective on it. That is, in many ways, Brooker's greatest asset, but also perhaps the limitation of this entire project. And for me, and I know this varies from viewer to viewer, but for me, the bleakest and grimmest versions of his vision, the way he writes these scripts, oftentimes by himself, are often the ones that I appreciate the least. And I think it gets a little lazy. I think his leaning into cynicism shortcuts a lot of what is the most interesting aspects of this exploration of technology. So my appreciation of each of these episodes, especially in rewatch, is like this balancing act of how much he foretold the future, how intriguing the concept or the conceit, the technological conceit is in the particular episode, how deeply he investigates it, and then honestly, for my personal ranking, how cynically he allows his perspective of humanity to become, which I think is a bias of his for sure. I think that is, once again, in the mix of this current season of the show. Briefly, my rewatch, season 1, I won't break them down one by one, but season 1, I was amazed at how easy those episodes went down. And so much of it, I think, has to do with the length of the episodes. By not making them supersized, except for the one exception of the White Christmas special, these were all 40 to 45-minute episodes, which seemed to be the correct amount given how, honestly, how cursory the exploration of technology eventually became. But many of those early episodes called for expansion. You could imagine a feature-length version or even a whole season of TV over some of these concepts, especially the ones that have nearly come to pass. Just to name one, in season 2, Be Right Back, we literally now have technology where you can train an AI based on someone's social media posts to become a virtual version of that person. So it could be someone who has passed on, or it could be someone who you were in a relationship with and now have broken up with. So there are some creepy implications, not only to being able to, in some ways, clone someone's personality, but in the possible addiction one would feel to that lost loved one or lost relationship, which would allow you to disconnect from reality. And this is happening right now with these very basic chatbots. And of course, the film Her also explored these topics. But Brooker got there first with his episode, and you think about when this technology could imitate that physical presence as well, how addictive and dangerous that technology could be to someone's psychological state. And all of those episodes went down so easy. Even the Waldo moment, by the way, which is almost universally considered one of the worst episodes of the series. And I remember the idea that just being a contrarian and just being a populist and just being a troll would get you elected before this wave of populism came, predicting the future. In the moment, I agree that that episode was pretty weak. But in my recollection of it now, I think, wow, that was maybe one of the most prescient episodes of the show. But I had still, in the back of my mind, maintained that it was pretty bad. And I'm surprised that its reputation continues to be as weak as it is, because in the rewatch, it is definitely the weakest of that whole batch of the first 2 seasons. But it is very watchable in the way that, honestly, some of the later episodes of the show, despite being significantly more ambitious, are not as entertaining or watchable. So even that one goes down pretty easy. And then when you think about the scale of the productions, that first season on Netflix, the one that begins with Nosedive, is probably the highlight of the series. I know some people still go back and prefer the BBC seasons, but when you think about the bigger budget, when you think about the number of episodes, I think there's 6 episodes in that season, and all of them are good to very good. It's a really impressive scaling up, and it's probably the most successful season of the show. And then I know there's a lot of people who think season 4 is just as good as season 3. I disagree. Problems that we start seeing with the show start to emerge in season 4, that second Netflix season. Again, I think it's 6 episodes. And even we see a sequel to it in this very current season of the show, the USS Callister episode. Even there, the technology is so silly that it keeps me from fully embracing that episode, which otherwise is terrific. And I feel it's lazy. You could have resolved some of the particular issues I have, and maybe I'll touch on them once again when we break down the current set of episodes. But I start seeing a little laziness. I start seeing that, oh, well, we just lean into the cynicism. I start seeing that the concepts are still fresh, but the execution not so much, and the ambition is not there as much either. So season 4 is still solid. It has some terrific episodes, but even the ones that are real highlights in that season start to feel like they're a little bit recycled. And then Bandersnatch for me overall didn't really work. An interesting experiment, but the story itself was not very intriguing, despite the fact that the choose your own adventure structure is a technological feat for sure, but very disappointing. Maybe just expectations, but I was pretty disappointed with that one. And then the following season, which only had 3 episodes, 3 terrible episodes. I know some people vouch for Smithereens. That doesn't even work for me. The Vipers episode, the one with Anthony Mackie, a really fascinating idea that is not explored at all. And an explanation of this technology is just silly. As I mentioned, Smithereens is probably the only episode here that connects with people emotionally, but didn't work for me. And then, of course, the Miley Cyrus episode, the least said about that one, the better. It's just really all the worst of the show, all on display in one place. So it really seemed like this experiment, especially with just 3 episodes in a season and none of them connecting with me, that it may have run its course. And then a lot of naysayers didn't like the last season of the show. I actually thought this was a step in the right direction. There was one stinker in the bunch. There is a much better episode of the show right there in plain sight. But even that one is half a good episode, even as it fails the rest of the way. And nothing is exceptional. None of them is going to be on the top 10 episode list of anybody's Black Mirror appreciation. But I thought overall, these were good scripts. Even the worst of it had some fun ideas in them. So a step in the right direction. I was mostly satisfied, especially directionally where the previous season went, which of course leads us to the current season. And my opinion after watching this entire season, I binged it over the course of about a day and a half, is this the first season of the show to have all good episodes since season 3? 6 episodes, so more ambitious than most of these seasons, most of these recent seasons. 6 episodes, I think, with ideas that are well executed. Now, are any of these shows going to be in your top 5 Black Mirror episodes ever? It is possible. There's one episode here that for some people, I think not for everybody, but for some people will be on that list. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this is perhaps what is the most interesting thing about this current season. I think that every episode here, more or less, probably there's one that's not probably going to make anyone's top 5 list. But I'd say other than one, there's probably segments of the audience that will put some of these individual episodes near the top of their Black Mirror all-time list. And that will probably be different episodes for different audience members, which I think is all for the good. Perhaps my favorite episode here, I won't spoil it yet, people might find it to be too mawkish, too artificially emotional, let's say. But it really worked for me. And then the USS Callister episode, which is the last of this season, which is the longest episode they've ever made, I believe, at least an hour and a half long, is exceptionally well made, but I have my usual USS Callister issues. But I can imagine people who already have USS Callister, the first one, near the top of their list. This is going to go right alongside it since it is, at the level of that execution for that particular episode. So it won't be on my top 5 list, but it'll be on someone's top 5 list. And I feel like that is the case nearly for every single episode in the series. So check this out. I guarantee you there will be at least 1 or 2 episodes here that will really resonate with you. And I do hope this indicates that Charlie Brooker is more excited or engaged with this project in general. And by the way, as a horror fan, where is the Red Mirror series? I want to see those Red Mirror. Maybe it comes out at Halloween. Is there a surprise coming? I hope. Netflix, if you're out there, I hope there's a Red Mirror season coming for Halloween. All right, so I'm going to break down each one of these episodes. There will be spoilers, a brief plot summary, then my review. Then I'll get into spoilers. I'll warn you where there's spoilers in those, although just assume that there'll be spoilers for each one of those individual segments. And then my ranking and how I would place them and how successful they were. And honestly, I was just talking to my wife about it. She's just been catching up on the show herself, just discussing it with her yesterday. And I was thinking about, in some ways, the way I would rank these particular episodes. Would I watch this show if this was a pilot for another series? And I have to say that is the compliment I'll pay here, and to the point of how maybe Brooker's more engaged now. There are multiple episodes, maybe most of the episodes of this season, that could actually be pilot episodes for an alternate series. probably directly correlates to how highly I would rank them. An example of how Black Mirror is trying to evolve and in some ways remixing itself along the way is the very first episode of this current season, an episode called Common People. The first remix element is the fact that our star is Rashida Jones, who we've seen in a lot of science fiction recently. She was in the first season of Silo, the very successful Apple TV Plus series, in the star of the less successful Sunny from last year, another Apple TV Plus science fiction, dystopian, very Black Mirror-ish series. And Chris O'Dowd, perhaps not dissimilarly, also appearing in a very Black Mirror-ish but significantly less cynical science fiction series, also on Apple TV Plus, The Big Door Prize, in which a machine shows up in town and starts telling people what their true destiny is supposed to be, and all the shenanigans that flow from that as people take this technology seriously, especially as it starts to show that it actually can predict the future to some extent, which has been canceled but should have gotten a larger audience. Another Easter egg here, one more thing, is that Rashida Jones not only appeared in these other science fiction series, but is also the writer of one of the best Black Mirror episodes, co-writer with Charlie Brooker, Nosedive. And one more callback, just one more. There's probably other Easter eggs I missed, but the most obvious one is this idea, she's a science teacher in this series, these mechanical bees that are replacing natural bees for the purposes of pollination. And of course, we've seen these mechanical bees in a previous episode of the Black Mirror also. In this episode, we see this young couple, very sweetly portrayed by Rashida Jones and Chris O'Dowd. They're childless, but trying to have a child. We meet them on their anniversary. They have a particular ritual. They go to this bed and breakfast every single year. She's a teacher. He's a construction worker. They are common people. They discover that she has an aggressive brain tumor. It is not survivable. However, there is a new technology which will replace this section of her brain with technology. They can upload that part of her brain into this server and then replace it afterwards. And then here's where the satire begins, biting the hand that feeds it, satirizing all of our subscription services. Of course, Netflix probably being the subscription service that we most commonly share, especially if we're watching this show on Netflix. And it turns out there is a monthly subscription to make sure that her brain remains active. And it's only $300 a month, which seems pretty reasonable. As a matter of fact, she probably earns more than $300 a month. Pretty certainly does as a teacher in this near future, I would assume. Also, very importantly, that Tracy Ellis Ross is this woman who's also gone through this procedure, is making the pitch. Look at me. I've gone through the procedure. I'm living proof that this will work. So an easy sales pitch. What's the alternative? Your loved one dying of this aggressive brain tumor. And I thought this was one of the better episodes of the season, exploring the idea of this and satirizing it very well. You're on the hook for the subscription. And then that baseline, what you get for that price, continues to be less and less, while the upgrades continue to be more and more. And the price of that and how your life starts to become more and more stifled. And now you truly are trapped, because what can you do if you suddenly need to pay for these additional upgrades? In some cases, simply to be able to travel further, a true luxury. But in other cases, when they suddenly start to inject ads, a very funny moment here in the episode where Rashida Jones starts to present advertisements to the people she's speaking to, appropriate to the current context. You can experience more joy. You can actually tune the different emotions you are experiencing. And all of this is extremely well realized, even to the point when they have a very uncomfortable conversation with their salesperson, Tracy Ellis Ross once again. And after the very uncomfortable conversation, she goes, and of course, because she's one of these patients as well, she goes and tunes her stress level, her discomfort down. So in some ways, it'd be a great enhancement to be able to tune down your nervousness, tune up your confidence when you want to do a presentation, for example. So there are all these benefits to this. And this would be, in its execution and its exploration of this idea, in the introduction of this concept. And I go back to that idea of, is this a pilot episode? Would I want to see a spin-off series for this? Is this idea deep enough for that? I would actually say yes. Creating a world in which people have this technology and can pay for these upgrades to their own personality, and how you could see an anthology in and of itself of these different people dealing with this in different ways, in pure terms, is absolutely something that could be a series in and of itself. So it is a really interesting idea, very well explored. But then here's where the ding is, and here's where the spoilers come, by the way. So if you haven't seen the episode, skip ahead now. I'll try to put timestamps for each one of these episode breakdowns, so skip ahead to that next timestamp. The one ding here is this show is almost nearly derailed, although I still recommend it, this particular episode, nearly completely derailed by the incredibly cynical turn that the show takes. Over the course of the episode, we have seen that the upgrades aren't only, in some cases, they're trapped. If you don't upgrade, then she's just going to be spouting advertisements all day long. We also see the fact that on their anniversary, he pays for this upgrade just for a limited number of hours. You can get hourly packages. And she is basically on MDMA all night long. The music sounds better. Just touching his hand arouses her. Their sex is way over the top, her enjoyment of it. And you see that he is being completely alienated from her heightened experience of the world. And this is where there's a real failure of imagination. Where things go at the end is, of course, as you would expect, things get bleaker and bleaker. She has more and more limited time. She needs to sleep more and more. They are limiting her capacity if she doesn't pay for the upgrades. Eventually, she wants to die. And he, very tragically, this very sad scene where he does buy her this upgrade, this pleasure, at least an hour of it, I believe, just 1 hour of it, where she can be back to normal or maybe even heightened. And she decides that after that, she wants to die. And he puts her out of her misery. And of course, another subplot in this whole entire thing is that there is a Twitch-like streaming service where, and this does happen on Twitch, by the way, where people live stream for money. What do you want me to do now? And they will sometimes humiliate themselves in public to raise money through their Twitch streams. This is an even darker version of it where people humiliate themselves on camera, showing their faces. This eventually leads to him losing his job because he gets humiliated, gets into a fight at work when he gets outed as one of these people humiliating themselves for money. Of course, he's trying to raise this money through this platform to pay for these upgrades to his wife's service. And inevitably, it leads to their downfall. They both lose their jobs. This is the only work he can get. She's not working anymore because she's sleeping so frequently, and the money gets tighter and tighter. And I do recommend this episode, by the way, for all those strengths that I outlined here. But there's a real failure of an imagination. As I'm watching the episode, I actually start to begin to think people might want these upgrades even without having true brain damage because they just want the enhancement. They want to be able to control their moods, to tune themselves for different experiences. And then the people who have lower plans, if they can't afford the upgrades, use some of their brain capacity to actually provide the services to the higher paying clientele. Anybody who uses AWS services, for example, you probably know that there are lower tiers where you get less capacity. And basically, if the higher paying tiers require the capacity, you get this deep discount, but only if you are willing to sacrifice performance even at peak times. And of course, you put less critical systems on in those circumstances. But the point being that this is technology that already exists, price plans that already exist. So could you imagine that she's willing to put herself to sleep 15 hours a day, give up her brain capacity to provide services for this higher end clientele not because it's the only option she has, but because she wants the premium experience. So then she has this premium experience, which alienates him. He's not having that experience. She's having that experience. And the rest of the time she's sleeping to be able to save so that she can have that premium experience. And he basically spends no time with her. And when he does spend time with her, she's having this completely disconnected experience that he's not having. That for me is a much more intriguing idea and it may be equally cynical, that it's our own appetites that drive us into these limitations, because I think we all are. We just watched the White Lotus here on the podcast, obviously, and our need to want more and then adapt to more and then want more and then adapt to more. And now that becomes this never-ending cycle of need that we have. I think you could explore it right here. And once again, we are our own worst enemies for this type of thing. And they plant those seeds here, especially with the fact that she can have these enhancements. So when I say this could be a pilot for a show, I could imagine that what I just outlined there could explain how this type of technology, especially if you opt into it, could completely change an entire culture. And that is intriguing. Honestly, this particular outcome where these poor people just get squeezed more and more until they commit suicide is not a very interesting way to explore this topic, I think. in the end. But until then, until the very final resolution, which is nonetheless emotionally works for me, it is very cleverly exploring this idea. But I go back to that, what I said before, that maybe this is a strength for this season, that an episode that you like the most could be not someone's cup of tea at all. My wife watched this episode and said to me, that was one of your favorite episodes this season, which it was. This was one of my favorites because I love how cleverly it explores this idea. But she only had that aftertaste of the final twist, which she just thought was predictable and upsetting and depressing for sure. And of course it is, but not in an intriguing way. So I actually see her point of view completely, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is divisive, basically. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a very divisive episode. For me, it did work because of that exploration of the topic. But it could have been so much better. And once again, going to, is this a pilot for a show or not? I think you could spin this up. This universe within where this technology exists is an intriguing premise for a show. And of course, if we start to believe, and maybe that's one more thing I want to circle back to, we start seeing here that there are shared elements to this universe that they are creating. And one of them being these contact lenses that it appears to be, although they seem to be permanently installed, that allow you to have this augmented reality experience. And not only do we see it here multiple times in explicitly the same technology in this particular season of the show, when you think about that imagery of the glazed over eyes, that when these contact lenses are activated, and how it is the same imagery we've seen in previous seasons, maybe this is consistently the technology that is being deployed throughout all of these seasons of the show. So there is some kind of unifying theory. Perhaps Brooker has a grander scheme to create one shared universe for all of these technologies, even though in previous seasons it really felt like these were happening in alternate universes, but maybe not. But this is a very believable technology, a very believable outcome, well explored, with, unfortunately, a very cheap and cynical ending that is the one negative on it. The second episode is called Bete Noire, and this one is really intriguing for most of its running time, although I think this is one of the weaker episodes of this current season. And in it we have our protagonist. She is a food scientist at a food company, very successful, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. She is experimenting with a new taste, and they bring in some members of the public to taste test an umami chocolate flavor. And it goes badly until one of the members of the group say, oh, you should really give it another try. And when people give it another taste, they suddenly are on board with it, and the flavor becomes a big hit. Importantly, this person who spoke up and changed the opinion of the room turns out to be someone that she knew when she was younger, someone she actually bullied in high school. And this woman becomes an intern and then becomes a member of the team. And before you know it, she starts to become very popular within the organization. But the twist here is that there is something going on, a Mandela-like effect, in which things that the protagonists are very confident actually happened start to mysteriously change. At first, it's just, oh, I sent something in that email and it's not there, or a word changed or a phrase changed. So perhaps this person is hacking into the computer system. But then the name of a restaurant that she was very familiar with apparently has changed. And at this point, she starts to think she might be losing her mind. And blaming her new coworker for all of this makes her seem insane. All of this is great fodder for a thriller, an office thriller, with the added twist of this Mandela effect. Is this her losing her mind? Is something actually going on? If actually something is going on, then how is it possible that she's pulling this off? And once again, here's where the spoilers kick in. The final twist here is that this bullied high school friend has developed some technology where she can actually jump into a parallel universe where if she states a fact into this device she carries with her, instantly, I guess her and whoever is immediately around her, see, this is where this thing starts to fall apart, are shifted into an alternate universe. Everything that's being said is true. Now, this could be the case for speaking of alternate universes, if you want to see something like this, check out a show we covered here on the podcast, Dark Matter, also on Apple TV Plus. I'm just recommending Apple TV Plus content all the time. But a similar concept, being able to slip into an alternate reality that gives you the particular condition you're looking for. Now, this is pretty funny if you are moving very subtly from one universe to another where the facts are relatively similar. Now, how it would be able to scoop up the people in your periphery or your immediate surroundings seems a little questionable, especially when I guess, given what happens here, it's not everybody that has this alternate perception. They have the perception that this has always been thus. So I guess it's only the person you're targeting. So how do you connect it only to one other person to bring only that other person with you into the alternate dimension? I don't know. None of this really makes sense, but it is kind of clever that it doesn't go the usual route you would expect here, that it's an alternate reality. They're inside of a computer or something like that, like a USS Callister type situation. So that's a fun conceit that you can travel between these alternate dimensions. But as soon as you start thinking about it, this whole thing falls apart. And that's kind of how I feel about the episode in general. The final reveal is kind of a little silly. It doesn't really pay things off. I know it's supposed to be funny. The final demand by the person who takes control of the device at the end, immediately escalates things to 11. I would have escalated much more slowly. I gotta tell you, just a little bit less. Don't go too far too fast, maybe. And maybe that's the experience of this, the villain here, or her tormentor, that she also maybe took things too fast. But that's also a limitation of it. When you think about her psychology, that the one thing she needed to do is go back and take care of this root triggering event, which was the bullying in school. I mean, not for nothing. This is my personal practical opinion, but if getting bullied in school makes you create this technology, I'll take that. I'll go back in time and get bullied in school so that I can invent something that will make me infinitely rich and live infinite lives. I'll take that. Apparently that was not the case here. That wound was so deep, that bullying wound was so deep, it drove her to this. But there's a lot of twists in the final moments, and that's also very rushed. The twists that come in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the show really needed to be spaced out a little bit more. But once again, I think about how all of these being pilot episodes, I would watch a show where different people, it could be an anthology. Often these ideas probably would be better explored as anthology episodes, but an anthology where people have access to this technology or discover it accidentally, and then the different versions of their fantasy lives could be a very funny thing to explore. This is very Twilight Zone. Of course, Black Mirror is Twilight Zone-ish always, but you can imagine, I just want to read all the time. I just want to watch movies, infinite amount of movies. I want to be incredibly rich. I want to have invented some really cool thing. So everybody could have a particular fantasy that they're trying to explore. All of that technological stuff is the weakest part here in this episode. What works really well is the early, am I losing my mind? Is this woman trying to destroy me? Why does she care? Why is she doing this to me? All of that stuff, the thriller elements of this show, of this particular episode, I should say, work really well. And then when it gets into the sci-fi twist, it's at its weakest, honestly, and very rushed and kind of silly. And this is one of the worst episodes of the season. All right, episode 3 is called Hotel Reverie. And as I mentioned, another thing that is prevalent here in this particular season is that the show seems to be remixing itself to some extent. With the first episode, not only the cynical twist at the end, but also just elements of being able to have these different versions of yourself, technologically enhanced, the technology itself that allows you to hack your own brain, humiliating yourself for payments, like in 15 million credits, for example. So there are thematic elements that are recycled in that particular episode of the show. Episode 2, if it's recycling anything, it's probably Joan is Awful, which I very much enjoyed, the premiere episode of last season. Another workplace, am I losing my mind type situation. But this third episode is very much feels like it is recycling thematically and even in plot points, and even its length. It's nearly identical runtime to one of the most successful episodes of Black Mirror, San Junipero. Now, this one is nowhere near as good as that season. This is another satire to some extent on Netflix itself. In this episode, Awkwafina shows up at some studio that still primarily owns classic films that are being forgotten by the modern culture, and they can't sell off remake rights, even though they have this particular film, Hotel Reverie, which is basically the Casablanca in this alternate universe. And a new technology has emerged where you can take the original film, scan it into a computer. It's actually a cool idea, by the way. You think about how ChatGPT just reads the internet and then can create, you can say, hey, pretend to be this character in this movie, and it will actually talk to you in that regard. Imagine a huge step evolutionarily forward where you can create an actual person that not only is acting like that person, but inhabits the role fully, and that you can then interact with it. This would be a great product, by the way. Could you imagine you have like a 3D headset and you could step into a particular, your favorite movie, and it's not like they have to code that. Like there are those experiences now, a 3D experience where you can walk around a place that has been walked around through with a 360-degree camera. But imagine you could just take your favorite DVD, put it into some technology, train the AI model on that thing. It will create each one of the characters in the movie, create a backstory for them, create rationalizations, interiority for each one of those characters. And then you can literally put your headset on, walk into it, and just start talking to these people. Of course, in the whole Black Mirror of it, they have like Freddy Krueger rules here that if you die in the world, you die outside too, or something like that. Which, of course, you have to create stakes here. Issa Rae is apparently a very famous actress in this particular universe. However, she's always the sidekick. Women don't get to take the center role. Even now, even in the future of this show, apparently she still is always the sidekick. Even when she gets recognized, people ask, oh, how is it working with Ryan Gosling? How was that? And she wants to be the star. So there's this new technology for this old film. They need somebody to step into the role. They reach out to all, this is a male role, by the way. They reach out to all the usual suspects to fill the role. Everybody turns it down, but Issa Rae, seeing the opportunity, playing Brandy Friday, by the way, character's name, sees the opportunity to be the lead in this movie, one of her favorite movies. They just need to switch the gender of the character and the race, importantly, which isn't really explored. The race thing could be interesting here when you consider how racist Hollywood was at this time. And of course, the culture in general, which is reflected through the movies, and that everybody just has colorblind glasses on and gender blind as well. There's nothing strange about these women flirting with each other in public. It would be interesting if that did create some complexity to the characters within that world. Emma Corrin plays the star of the original film, and we discover over the course of the episode that the actual actress had been closeted and eventually committed suicide. She agrees to this, steps into this world. Somebody pours some coffee or something on the computer. It's like the biggest cliche in the world, but knowingly, entertainingly, she gets trapped inside. Her consciousness does. Issa Rae's very funny, exploring this artificial world, saying the dialogue, and we see the irony oftentimes of her saying the dialogue. It's also clever that things don't go exactly to plan. The wrong character dies within the film, for example, and now they have to keep actively rewriting the story. And of course, not writing script, but actually having Brandy change the way she interacts with characters to put the story on the original rails. Issa Rae is very funny in all of these scenes, and her surprised reaction to things, or even the way she says the dialogue, but says it in her particular way, and how the very stodgy characters in this artificial world react to it. Most of this works. She has nice chemistry. Emma Corrin and Issa Rae do. This becomes a romance, very much as I mentioned, this thwarted lesbian romance from San Junipero, very much transplanted here into this artificial world. All of that is really well done. It's beautiful. The black and white photography is beautiful. It has a emotional button here at the end as well. I thought it was very nice. But in general, this could have been more interesting. I think the biggest problem with this episode, I think this episode's too long. It's necessary to some extent because at one point, Brandy gets trapped when the computer gets frozen. Only Clara and Brandy are moving. It takes only hours in the real world, but it's taking days, months perhaps, within this artificial world. So they spend a lot of time together, and this is when the romance blooms. And there's a degree of tragedy when the characters get reset. And of course, Brandy's the only one who remembers the romance at all. So these are all intriguing elements. Most of them are not very well developed, which is the drawback here. And the episode's too long. You really could have done all of this in an hour, maybe even a little bit less, I think. Although you do need some of that time to see them build that relationship. But I think that extra time, when you could actually see the romance developing between them, we don't have enough diversity of experience. Like they're basically sitting in the same room when we cut back to them. And We see the days passing on the outside. So they've just been sitting there, sun rising and setting for days or weeks, and then we just see a montage of the romance. I just think the time is not well used. You either need to spend an extended period of time, 10, 15 minutes, uninterrupted within the artificial world as the romance develops, which of course is much closer to what we saw in San Junipero. They should have just followed their own template rather than cutting to Aquafina and what's happening on the outside and then cutting back. And they seem to be just continuing conversation we saw them in 3 weeks ago. It doesn't work. They either make it shorter or restructure things. This is a good episode. Everything about it is good. I like the production. I like the concept. I like the execution. I like the comedy. I like the performances. Everything is good. But this could have been much better. And it does not hit, if you want to compare it, and you can't help but compare it to San Junipero, it doesn't hit the way San Junipero hit. It is fine. It's good. It's good. And by the way, once again, I say your mileage may vary on all these things. I can imagine someone watching this and loving it. Didn't quite work for me, but I'm sure for some people, this will work better. I'm sure for some people, they'll be like, this didn't work at all, as well as San Junipero, and I didn't like it that much. I can see both sides of that. For me, it's fine. Most of it works. I wish the film within the film was more interesting. I can't imagine this with this plot, this being a all-time classic, but everything could have been a little better, but it's overall good. The back half of these 6 episodes begins with an episode called Plaything. Honestly, for maybe my least favorite episode of this entire season of show, this one has the most caveats and clauses. And honestly, in my reassessment here for the podcast, it may have stepped up a little bit in my overall ranking. First of all, although it seems to take place in an alternate timeline, it shares characters with Bandersnatch. I forgot to mention that going into the alternate reality episode here, Bete Noire, you can actually see Bandersnatch as an example of exactly that as well, being able to step into alternate histories. But it also shares the themes. You could potentially read Bandersnatch as being some paranoid delusion in a mentally ill person's mind. For a great deal of its running time, this very episode shares that as well with Bandersnatch. One more interesting overinvestment perhaps in this particular episode. The game that's outlined within this episode, Thronglitz, is actually available on your Netflix app. If you go to the gaming section, it's there as a game, but also can just be downloaded onto your iOS or Android device. So if you want to play this game, you can play it yourself. This game, by the way, basically a ripoff or a satiric reinterpretation, depending on how you want to read it, of a game called Creatures from the mid-90s. So you have here a critic who is reviewing a game in the mid-90s, and the game very much is like this game Creatures from that period of time, where you basically have a Tamagotchi, you nurture it, you raise it, you can teach it actual words. So it's very similar to what we see outlined in this particular episode of the show. And all the Easter eggs here are actually to Charlie Brooker's actual career. He was a video game reviewer in the mid-90s. He's a founder of, or co-founder of Computer Exchange, seen here, the hardware reseller. But in the episode itself, we see Peter Capaldi playing Cameron Walker, who is at a convenience store. He's extremely disheveled. He tries to steal something. When he's arrested, he seems to be just some vagrant until they discover that his DNA matches DNA on this murder case from many years before. And during this good cop, bad cop interrogation, Capaldi basically narrates the flashback sequence of when he was a younger man, working as a video game reviewer. And he's a very awkward young man and is sent to meet with Colin Rittman, a character we've met once before in Bandersnatch, played by Will Poulter once again, who is much more famous now than he was back then. And he introduces this Thronglitz game to the reviewer and happens to step out of the office just in time so that he can steal it and take it home with him. We find out in this narration and through the police investigation itself, the game never came out. It was destroyed. All copies of it were destroyed. So presumably this was all left behind intentionally because the Capaldi character had been vetted in some way, that he would be a good parent to these creatures. Perhaps. But of course, the overall mystery, why is his DNA tied to this person? We see he doesn't have any friends in his earlier life, but he has this drug-dealing acquaintance who crashes with him and also supplies him with drugs. And then, of course, while he's taking LSD getting to learn the language even of these creatures and gets more and more fixated on raising them. The question begins to arise as to whether this is actually happening or is this all happening in his mind. One day he's out, this character Lump, this drug-dealing acquaintance, starts to play the game, but in as cruel a way as possible. When Cameron gets back home and sees what's happening, he ends up strangling Lump to death. And he is now this Lump that has been discovered all these years later. All right, here's where the twist comes. It turns out through the decades, he has been training these creatures more and more. He is obsessed with raising them. Of course, if you actually believe that you have created a whole new species, you probably would be fixated on their well-being. We see a montage as he is continuously upgrading his hardware so this AI can become better and better and better. By the way, AI itself has become better and better by throwing capacity at it. And he even put a port in his head so that these creatures could learn how the human brain works. All of this is so that they could create software, a signal that will play on all of the emergency broadcast systems, like all technology around the country, perhaps around the world. And all of this is so that these creatures can migrate into our human minds. Now, what's intriguing about this idea is where it leaves things in the final moments. Something has happened, some kind of software has been downloaded into humanity. Presumably, it has already occurred to the Cameron character. And Cameron says it has merged with this AI and he has not lost any part of his essence. However, he also says that he is an improved version of himself. So has he changed or has he not changed? Not well defined. Intentionally so. And then there's also the intriguing idea of, for example, if you've ever seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers, what do you lose of yourself if you were to be in this utopian society? And then there's one more question as to whether this is utopian or not. We see that I, witnessing the murder of the other human, is this also how these creatures are being trained to kill each other? I don't actually think this, first of all, even though they're witnessing there, and there's obviously the implication by having the cold computer eye watching them as they fight, that they're learning some of this cruelty to each other. But then we don't get the indication that they, within their virtual world, are cruel to each other. They seem to be continuously expanding and evolving and multiplying. My guess is they simply want to live in the natural world, the physical world. And there's also a particular interpretation that they want to kill the humans. They want to punish them for their cruelty. But I don't read that at all either because of the final shot of this hand being held out between Cameron and the police officer that's been so antagonistic to him. Presumably that he will take his hand, even though that there is the shared conscience there of the original police officer. So is this a terrifying but actual utopian view, or the idea that utopia could be terrifying in and of itself? I think that's probably the way to read this. For me, this is my least favorite episode of the season. As I said, just thinking about these ideas, because they all happen in the final seconds of the episode, unpacking them now makes it more interesting. It feels like this is all coming a little too late. All right, the next episode is the highlight of the season for me. This is the one I mentioned that I think for many people, this will be their favorite episode. This is definitely, I think, in the pantheon of best Black Mirror episodes. I can imagine, even as I watch it, that people will say, well, it's a little overly sentimental. The plot is very basic. The twists are telegraphed. I agree with all of that, and I can understand it being a limitation for folks' appreciation of this. But for me, I think all of that is intentional. It's the familiarity of the expectations of what we're about to see, which allows the drama and the tragedy of the circumstance and the performance, Paul Giamatti's performance here in this episode, Eulogy, to really shine through. You could almost imagine, do I want to see a pilot episode of any of these? Even Plaything theoretically could have a spin-off where we see the world after the fact, like, is the utopia really utopian? So even there, it works as not necessarily a pilot episode of a show. I can't imagine a season of that, but it would be interesting perhaps to revisit that universe now that we supposedly have this peace and harmony between all of these different people because of these creature implants. And then what starts to happen when maybe things aren't as utopian as they appear. So even that could work as a pilot. I was discussing this with my wife last night, and of all the episodes, this Eulogy episode is the one that I would love to see an entire anthology of Eulogy-like episodes. So in this episode, we see Paul Giamatti. He is in his late middle age. He gets news from this Eulogy technology company that a lover he knew many decades earlier had passed away, and little is known about her earlier life. And they're trying to create this Eulogy experience where, once again, the same technology, those contact lenses with the chip placed on the temple that allows you to experience a memory or some augmented reality. And this particular implementation allows you to actually step into photographs and recreate your memories and then actually record them and share them theoretically for a eulogy. And the stakes are not cataclysmic. It's not the end of the world. We are not all being impregnated with Tamagotchis, and all for the better. This simply is the Giamatti character, Philip, stepping into his past and remembering this lost love and the pain, the deep pain that this relationship left. But it's also a mystery. He's walking through these photographs, re-exploring his memories, maybe misremembering, maybe not having seen all the clues of his own past. And I love this idea of this as an actual series. You could imagine this could be comedic. Maybe you're putting together memories for a wedding reception and something really humiliating has been included in someone's memory, and now you're trying to erase it from everybody's memories so that's not part of the package that's being provided to the wedding family. That's very funny. You can imagine you're doing a eulogy for someone who died of natural causes, only to discover that it was actually a murder. And now there's police are using this technology to try to unravel the murder. And the eulogy itself, the experience of the eulogy, we discover that this person who's having the experience is the murderer, or it's the person who's having the revelation that is solving the murder inadvertently. All of this to say that this is an incredible idea. I love this. And the realization of it is so beautiful. He's able to step into these photographs, all the little details here. This could actually be staged somewhere. And that even in the representation of the technology, you could actually do that with a virtual set where you can actually turn the set. I love the detail where if someone's blocking somebody else out, when the images start to separate into 3D, the people behind are first completely blacked out. Then they're just kind of like gray blocks. Then as Philip starts walking in between the characters, their faces start to have details. This is really, really well thought out. It's beautifully done. I won't even do spoilers for this one. There's really not much to spoil. It is really just someone recollecting on their youth, which I think we all do over time. And this is a standalone. I mean, if you're not 100% committed to watch the entirety of this season, just watch this one episode. It's really, really great. Giamatti's fantastic in it. It has this beautiful emotional wallop at the end. The music is beautiful. There's a musical component to this as well. The twists there are actually a few twists. I predicted them pretty early on. As I mentioned, it's fun to have a mystery that's being unraveled and the audience can kind of guess with, but none of that is actually what this is about. What this is about is Philip being able to re-examine this period of his past. There could be a darker version of this episode. I'm glad that Brooker didn't lean into his most cynical aspects. This realization that this memory is actually not the way Philip remembered it, and that maybe he missed out on an alternate life and it was all his own doing, could have catastrophic effects on his life, on his emotional well-being. But once again, that is not what the film is about. This is about having closure with your own past, and it's really well executed. I love this episode of show, and it's definitely one of my favorites. Okay, and then lastly, we get the longest episode of Black Mirror ever, the sequel to USS Callister, Into Infinity. Even its subtitle makes you think about Star Trek, and of course, that is all this is. I know some people have said, oh, well, for such an upgrade and all the expectations that came with being a sequel to USS Callister, this is a little bit of a disappointment for me, given the fact that I have a big problem, I'm going to outline it here, with the whole premise of USS Callister and how easily it could have been resolved. The fact that we're just more distanced from my biggest pain point with appreciating this concept to start with makes me like this one better. Reach out to me, by the way, if you have even more Easter eggs here in this grouping of episodes. But this particular episode is the one where I see the most winks and Easter eggs to other continuities within Black Mirror itself. Whenever there's like a news ticker or whenever there's news on, or even if you're just hearing news headlines in Black Mirror, always tune into those because there are Easter eggs there. Oh, by the way, of course, the biggest Easter egg of all in Black Mirror is that song, Anyone Who Knows What Love Is, which appears in so many episodes of Black Mirror. We see it here again in this particular season of show. There's a karaoke scene all the way back in Common People. So, of course, that's the biggest Easter egg. But just in this one episode, just in this USS Callister sequel, there's not only, of course, the fact that it's a sequel. We see that the Prime Minister, Michael Callow, is now a celebrity of some kind. This, of course, references all the way back to the very first episode of Black Mirror ever. The CEO, the CTO, I should say, of Rivermind, which is the technology used in Common People. We see a headline that he's stepping down. There's the announcement. This also has happened in multiple episodes, by the way. We saw it last season where this Streamberry, which is the Netflix analog, is releasing Hotel Reverie. So, of course, the remake that we saw earlier in this season has been released. And very importantly, by the way, we see that Thronglets 2, the sequel to Thronglets, by the way, Creatures, the original, or the template for that game, has many iterations. A sequel to that game has been released. So therefore, we assume that we're not in a universe where Thronglets has brainwashed everybody in the world and Thronglets wasn't buried decades ago by the creator in this version of the universe. The game came out, it got reviewed, it was a success, and now decades later, there's a sequel. Now, this sequel picks up immediately where we left off with USS Callister, the original. Interestingly, we see a previously on segment here in the episode, and in case you have any ambiguity, you really do not need to rewatch USS Callister, although I did, as long as you've seen it at some point, because all the pertinent points, even the character beats, are literally replayed in this episode, which is probably part of the reason that it's an hour and a half long. Of course, this episode, again, we see Kristen Milioti playing Nanette, the video game version of them. They had escaped from this private server, but now they were in the actual game where millions of people are trying to kill them. Of course, the difference is that they need to buy time, buy weapons, need to survive, not just to be refreshed again, like these outside players, these human players, but they will actually die. This is life and death for them for real. But this show's having a lot of fun. The crew cannot even pay attention, even though this is all life and death. Maybe just because of the tedium of their lives, they're okay with being obliterated. Because every single time she's not around, and that's not around, all they want to do is watch The Real Housewives of Atlanta. And the main players here in this episode are Kristen Milioti and Jimmy Simpson, who have dual roles within the game and outside as well. And it's interesting to see how these characters have evolved, the ones that are inside the game versus outside. Nanette has become very empowered inside. Her outer self is still very much a junior employee who is trying to impress Walton, the Jimmy Simpson character. Meanwhile, Walton has become more humane in the computer game version of himself, probably because he had to witness his son die. That'll probably recalibrate your morality. Whereas the outside Walton just wants to kill these characters and go back to the status quo where the company's doing very well. Okay, here's where the spoilers come in, so jump ahead if you'd like. We assumed that the Walton inside the game had died at the end of USS Callister, but he actually survived and regenerated. There is a very funny Castaway reference here. He's gone native. He has a rock with a hole in it. Let's not talk about that hole. It's his version of Wilson. By the way, has Jimmy Simpson gotten jacked up? He didn't have pecs in the first series, did he? These rogue players, which are our team, have no player tags, which of course puts a big red flag on something weird going on, have been killing off characters and stealing their gold. They're basically pirates, but they're doing it because they need that gold to survive within the game itself. Over the course of the episode, they decide that in the same way that they escaped from a private server into the game at large, they need to go into the core, the center of this universe that creates all of these universes, all these planets, and create another private server where they can go in and be, once again, returned to the state they were in the first season of the show. We discover from Walton that the actual center of this universe is where Robert, the Jesse Plemons character, actually is. Of course, Nanette has had terrible experience with Robert, discovering that he was basically abusing a version of herself in this game. And this particular version of herself has had the experience of serving under him, where he terrorized the entire crew. But this isn't the same Robert. It is an alternative version. And we discover from Walton that the same technology, this DNA cloning technology that has been banned, was used to create a virtual version of Robert, who's basically been enslaved there for, in his mind, who knows, centuries, creating infinite worlds and never sleeping. So in many ways, he has had the worst outcome of all of these characters. And he finally has some company when Nanette shows up requesting this private server. In the outside world, she discovers that Walton chasing Nanette accidentally got her nearly killed, approaching brain death at the local hospital. And Robert says, you have to choose. You have to choose between your crew or me moving this version of you into your outside self. And just like one of these Star Trek episodes where there's some kind of moral dilemma, it actually turns out it's all just a test. Very apropos to this type of genre of show. She can actually have both things, or so he states. Of course, it turns out that he is still the creep he always was, and he's not going to cut and paste her into her body. He's going to copy and paste her because he wants to keep a copy there for him. She ends up killing this virtual version of himself, which causes the entire universe and therefore the game itself to implode. She puts the disc in time just in the final moments. She gets transported into her body in the physical world. She survived. Her outside version of herself, I guess, survived. The body survived. And now she has a version of herself that's pretty similar, had this crazy experience, but more or less a similar version of herself now inhabiting that body. But here's the final twist. It turns out, in her head, very being John Malkovich style, she also has these passive viewers inside of this spaceship that she has now become with the whole crew, seeing the world through her eyes. And they can communicate, just like we saw all the way back in the first episode, USS Callister. They can make calls to the outside world. So they talk to her on her cell phone. And that's it. They are like this weird, happy family, I guess. Crew still united. And she's become the spaceship for the rest of them. But she is still the captain since she gets to make all decisions of what she's going to do, including watching Real Housewives of Atlanta, of course. And going back to the idea of, do you want to see more of this or not? Yeah, I want to see another episode. Maybe she can get those folks back into some version of this game. By the way, the entire gaming universe has been wiped out. But maybe Jimmy has a copy of Robert, an illegal copy of his consciousness, and can try to respawn the universe. And then there's an option, possibly, of getting all these folks out of Nanette's head. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is not the last time we see this universe of characters. And this is fun. I mean, I don't have much else to say. This is a fun episode of TV. I think your mileage may vary whether you like this one better or not. I do want to spend just a moment on the thing that bothers me about this so much. The idea that you would drink from a coffee cup or suck on a lollipop, that your DNA can then recreate you inside this alternate version. I guess that could make sense, right? You take the DNA, birth the child, you raise it to whatever age that person happens to be, and should be pretty close to whatever the person looks like in the real world. Fine. I'll buy that. The fact that they have the consciousness of the person up until that moment makes no sense to me at all. How does that happen? And there would be easy fixes for this, right? When you go into the game, you literally are putting your conscious into this virtual world. They're creating a virtual version of you. So maybe they take a snapshot of you and then they map that snapshot onto the virtual version of you inside the game itself on Robert's server in the original film. So there are pretty easy fixes for this weirdness. But yeah, I remember seeing the first episode and just thinking, so someone sucks on a lollipop and then that person literally thinks they were at work that day. It's not even a facsimile of your memories. It's oh, I just woke up 5 minutes ago. I was in the office. It's how does your DNA have your current memories in it? None of this makes any sense to me. And that just gets yada yada. But like I said, easy enough to fix. That was such a implausibility that it damaged my appreciation of that episode, even as Jesse Plemons is hysterically funny, doing a great, not necessarily an imitation of William Shatner, but his performance reminds you of Shatner in such a very clever way. So, I mean, there's so many great things about both of these episodes, and yet I just have significant problems with understanding how, any plausibility to this technology working the way it does. Yeah, so my overall ranking of this season of the show, episode 1, Common People, this episode is an 8 out of 10 for me, knocked down to a 7 by the cruelty of the finale, which it's not just the cynicism of it. It makes the exploration of the topic actually less interesting for me. Episode 2, Bete Noire, a 6 out of 10, a mild recommendation. The first half of this episode, the thriller set office where somehow you're misremembering things and the paranoia around that, really strong stuff. The resolution, the more it explains things, the sillier it gets, the less interesting the material becomes. Episode 3, Hotel Reverie, another 3 stars, another 6 out of 10. Everything is good. The comedy is good. The production is more than good. The performances are good. The concept is good. But really nothing is great. 6 out of 10, another mild recommendation. Next up comes Plaything. This is only going to give a 5 out of 10. I might bump it up to a 6 out of 10 given the something that happened while I was doing the review here. I think once again, this is a really interesting concept. The narration, basically it's narrated, by the way. Brooker doesn't use narration, but instead what he does, like he did in White Christmas, for example, is to have a character tell you about something that happened in the past while we see that story be told, while person is supposedly talking to another character, but really it's basically narrating to the audience. And we have another similar device here in this particular episode, Plaything. Other than some intriguing ideas, I don't know how well realized this particular episode is. Next episode, Eulogy. This is an 8 out of 10. This could go even higher. I've seen it twice now. I watched it with my wife. She very much enjoyed this episode as well. This could be like a 9 out of 10. There's a couple of things, a little bit of the cliche of a lot of the plot and some of the twists that maybe dampens my enthusiasm a tiny bit, but emotionally this works really well. So this is an 8 out of 10, maybe even higher. And lastly, that Into Infinity, the USS Callister sequel. This is a 7 out of 10. It does a lot of fan service. Entertainingly, I think it does a solid job. Another good episode. And like I said, all of these episodes, I'd recommend all these episodes. I think all of them, even their worst, for me, Plaything, maybe that's a 6 out of 10 for me. Have any of the episodes from this season made it onto your all-time list or onto the bottom of the list? Tell me your favorite episode from this season. Tell me your favorite episodes of Black Mirror in general. I'd love to hear all of that, so reach out to me, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, or in the YouTube comments. Okay, last thing to bring up here is, of all the strange possible TV shows that would have this kind of cultural impact to spin off complementary or knockoff versions of themselves, Black Mirror, an anthology series, sci-fi anthology series, which I think is a great idea. You think about the success of The Twilight Zone, for example, for all these years, and how it's been rebooted multiple times and knocked off, copied by The Outer Limits, for example. So maybe it's not that surprising that something like this would spin off more experiments as well. But just in the next few months, we're going to see definitely Black Mirror-inspired projects. On May 13th, Bad Thoughts is coming to Netflix. This is created by Tom Segura, the famous comedian, and partially created by the writer of Drunk History as well. 6 dark comedy episodes. So it uses sketch comedians inside of these Black Mirror-like premises. This sounds intriguing. I like black comedy. I like the idea that you're putting people who are good at improvising into these Black Mirror-style situations and seeing what they come up with. Curious about this one? This is coming out on May 13th. And then that same week, on May 15th, also on Netflix, Love, Death, and Robots is coming back for yet another season. I think there's a lot of overlap between Love, Death, and Robot fans as well as Black Mirror fans. Just letting you know that it's coming back. And if you've never watched this is state-of-the-art animation. It's an anthology. These episodes have no correlation one to the other, different creative teams. It's very variable in quality, but always interesting. Even the worst of these are interesting for some reason. Sometimes just the beautiful animation style, sometimes for a very intriguing premise. And unlike Black Mirror, it's not like, well, this one's not really working for me. It's an hour and 15 minutes long. It's like, this one's not really working for me. And it's 15 minutes long, and there's another episode right around the corner. So I very much like Love, Death, Robots. The best of these episodes, which are sometimes just 17 or 20 minutes long, are some of the best science fiction you'll see. So I do highly recommend, if you are a sci-fi fan and you like Black Mirror and you don't watch Love, Death, and Robots, do check it out. 3 seasons currently available, 4th season coming on May 15th. And we'll be covering it here on the podcast. And of course, one more show that still is undated, but supposedly coming out this summer, the mysterious Rhea Seehorn, Vince Gilligan follow-up to Better Call Saul, which is described as a darkly comedic drama series that seems to have one overarching story, but within it explores these different technologies and people living in this world with these different technologies. So very much inspired, overtly inspired by ideas raised by Black Mirror. And of course, just given the talent here, one of the most anticipated shows of the year. So probably by the end of the summer, we'll be seeing that. And lastly, one recommendation of a show that I think way too few people have seen, and everybody who's a fan of Black Mirror should watch this series, Tales from the Loop, which is available on Amazon Prime. And if you haven't watched this one yet, there's some variability here too, but at its best, this is better than Black Mirror. And then at its worst, it's no worse than the worst of Black Mirror. Unfortunately, never came back for another season, and very much is like I was describing what that Gilligan series will be like, where there is a unified world we're in, but these are individual anthology episodes all taking place and even characters crossing over. So if that is a template for what we see in that other series, I think we're in for a treat, especially considering the talent there. But if you've never watched it, definitely do. It's if you need something after you've wrapped up your season of Black Mirror and have never watched it, Tales from the Loop, it's really good. All right, later this week, Darren and I will be discussing Mobland. And then at the end of the week, Sona and I will be discussing episode 3 of Your Friends and Neighbors. Stay tuned for all of that. Subscribe, of course, if you haven't. And reach out to me, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. And I'll talk to you soon.